Yeah. In this session, let's start looking at this concept of leverage, which is another important function which a finance manager in a company is well behind. He is something. He will be always observing uh, what is the leverage, and based on that, some kind of decisions need to be taken. Just like capital budgeting or the sources of capital and what is the cost of capital, looking at what portion of the capital is in the form of debt and what portion should be in the form of equity. And as a definition, when we use the word leverage, wherever we use this word leverage, it means it's the usage of some fixed costs within the business. The fixed costs could be in the form of interest. From a company standpoint, whether it makes a profit or not, it has to pay an interest to its lenders. That's one of the fixed costs for the company. Whereas the other side of the fixed costs could be the operations related fixed costs. Let's say I have purchased a machine. Whether I produce anything or not, there is a cost that is incurred. Right? Even if I don't produce even a single good using that machine, the cost of the machine is a headache to the company. So they are all like fixed costs. So there could be two types of fixed costs from a company standpoint. One is from an operations perspective. From an operations perspective, whenever we use the word fixed cost, it's more like it has nothing to do with the quantity of output produced. Let's say I have taken a building on rent. Whether I have whether I have business or not, I have to pay the rent for the building. Those are all a part of my operations fixed costs. And similarly, if I take a loan, whether my business runs or not, I have to pay an interest on that. So, from a company standpoint, what are those components of fixed costs that are existing? And that is what we say that is the amount of leverage the company is having. Apart from just looking at debt and equity composition, we will look at in broad terms the composition of the fixed costs as a part of the business. And it is good also to a certain extent. As long as the fixed costs are there to a certain extent, it is good for the company. But exceeding a certain extent, it it bounces very badly with the company. Now, why? Probably we have seen earlier also when we were discussing on cost of capital, the cost of debt for the company was much cheaper than cost of preferred stock, and it is much cheaper compared to cost of equity. So cost of debt is much cheaper for a company, which cost of debt is nothing but interest. Compared to the dividend, the debt is much cheaper. I can raise a loan at a much lesser rate of interest than the proportion of a dividend that I have to pay to my investors. Right? Partnership is always more expensive compared to taking a loan. That's the reason people prefer more of a debt wherever they can get it. So leverage is beneficial from that standpoint. Even if I have to pay some fixed amount every year, that quantity is much lesser than the expectation of the equity investor. The same way, probably if I had taken a building on a rental purpose, right? Probably if I had manufactured a big volume, if my revenues were very high, the cost, the per unit cost associated with that building rental is a very small value compared to if my per unit compared to if my revenues were much lesser, then per unit cost of the building rental looks much heavier. So basically there is an advantage associated with the fixed cost, there is a disadvantage also associated with the fixed cost. To what extent company makes a balance, strikes a balance between these two, is the key intention of this particular chapter. How do we look at that particular aspect? And for a company, if at all any leverage exists, it plays with the risk, because if there is a debt, there is a chance of bankruptcy, right? The higher the debt, the higher the interest I have to pay, and probably one bad year, if I'm not able to pay the interest on time, there is a scope for bankruptcy coming into picture. But in case of equity, there is no question of bankruptcy, because at the max, the equity investor cannot demand anything from the company, because it's a risk that he has taken, and whatever the return he gets, he has to enjoy it. It could be a zero, it could be a 200%. So he has to be prepared from both those aspects. Whereas in case of debt, that's not the case. It's a mandatory to pay, right? So from that standpoint, the company's risk actually increases if it has a larger amount of fixed costs as a proportion of the total, as a proportion of the total composition. If the fixed costs of a company are very, very high, one bad year, 2 bad years. Very recently, we have seen a lot of companies filing for bankruptcies. One of the biggest investment banking firms and all, they filed for bankruptcy in the last few years. The simple reason being the proportion of fixed costs as a proportion of their total portfolio. If the fixed costs are much higher, as long as the performance of the company is really good, as long as the economy is really good, they will fetch you extraordinary returns. Your profitabilities are going to mount up like anything. Let me just demonstrate that aspect to you. Let's say we'll talk about two companies which where both of them have made a sales of 100 only, right? 100 million is the sales which both these companies have made, and let me say they have sold some 10 units each at 10 million. They have produced 10 million 10 units, and they sold each unit at 10 million. Now probably for this first company, they have entirely outsourced, and their variable cost, let me assume that it is around 6 million. So 6 million per unit it has costed them, and their variable cost is 60 million. And for this company, let me assume that their variable cost is only 30 million. They had some fixed, they have produced a very extraordinary machine, they have purchased a very extraordinary machine, because of which per unit cost for them, let me assume that it costs only overall 30 million. And let me say the fixed costs for this company are 0, whereas the fixed costs for this company are another 30. So overall the total cost for both of them is 60 only. Total cost for both of them is 60. So probably if I say profit before tax or profit before interest and tax, so for both of them it is 40 only, right? For both of them this is 40 itself, profit before interest and tax. Now let's say this company doesn't have any loan, right? No loan. So interest, I'll take it as 0. And let's say for this company, the interest is another 10 million, right? So finally, the profit, and let's say tax. Profit before tax, it is 40 for this company, whereas it is 30 for this company. And let's say tax, for simplicity purpose, we'll take it as 50%. 50% of this amount just for simplicity. So tax is 20 million here and probably 15 million here. So the final profit, let's say, is around 20 million here, whereas it is 15 million here. This is the typical structure for both the companies. Now let me say a sales is increased by 1 unit. For both the companies, they are increasing the sales by 1 unit and they are not disturbing anything else. So 11 units overall. So if it is 11 units, right? So if it is 11 units, what will happen for both the companies? The sales will increase to 110. Even for this company, it will increase to 110. And because the sales have gone up by 10%, I am assuming that the variable cost also is going up by 10%. Okay. So these two have gone up like this. Variable costs have gone up, but fixed costs will not change. For one extra unit purchase or producing, the fixed cost is fixed. So the fixed cost is not changing in this case. Fixed cost not changing. So even this is what is happening to your EBIT. Now